Kendall, her future daughter-in-law, froze mid-toast, champagne flute trembling. "This house was leased?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Lillian, the groom's mother, stood with quiet precision. "And the lease is cancelled." Gasps tore through the bridal shower like shattered glass. Her son Michael turned white. Beth, Kendall's mother, nearly dropped her mimosa. And from the back, someone murmured, "She just evicted her own family." Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The frosting on the cake was immaculate. Lace-piped white roses, a tiny fondant bride perched delicately on the edge, holding a champagne flute like victory. But the air inside the sunlit event space was stifling, despite the open windows and strategically placed pink peonies. Everyone smiled too hard. Lillian adjusted the hem of her dress and sat back in the white folding chair that had clearly been added last. It wasn't covered in tulle like the others. Her table was closest to the coat rack, half shielded by a decorative arch. Not quite invisible, but not truly present either. "I told you to be good," her son Michael whispered, crouching by her chair as if he were speaking to a restless toddler, not the woman who'd once stayed up 3 nights straight to hand-stitch his Halloween costume. "I'm not a sparkler," Lillian said coolly. "I don't go off unless I'm lit." Michael gave a nervous laugh and straightened. "Just be nice. It's Kendall's day." Lillian didn't answer. She just reached for the untouched glass of cucumber water someone had left behind on the table, not for her. Across the room, Kendall floated from guest to guest like a pageant queen at a ribbon cutting. Her ivory jumpsuit hugged her like armor, and her hair was styled in soft, effortless waves that probably took $400 and a team of professionals. She posed for photos beside a metallic bride-to-be balloon arch and laughed when her friends shrieked over the cocktail napkins she'd had printed with the phrase, "A wife always wins." No one offered Lillian a drink. No one invited her for photos. Even the charcuterie table had been arranged so that Kendall's mother, Beth, could greet each guest directly, except the ones she didn't want to greet. Lillian knew the drill. This wasn't her party. It wasn't even her war. It was just her warning. She had debated not coming at all. After all, she hadn't even received a proper invitation, just a group text 2 days prior with the address and a passive line from Michael, "Hope you can make it." No details, no warmth, but still, she'd come. Because sometimes a storm doesn't show up to destroy, sometimes it arrives to remind the land who it belongs to. Across the room, a blonde in a linen jumpsuit leaned toward Kendall and whispered something. Kendall's eyes flicked toward Lillian and narrowed, just slightly. Lillian looked away and saw the centerpiece at her table, smaller than the others. No peonies, just a lone rose in a vase. A joke? A mistake? It didn't matter. Her hand settled on her purse. Inside was a small wrapped box with layered tissue and a sealed envelope. She didn't intend to give it until the end. If at all. Laughter bubbled from the far side of the room. Kendall and her bridesmaids again, howling over a slideshow of engagement photos projected behind the cake table. There were no pictures of Michael's late father, no photos of their home, not even one with Lillian in it. Just staged smiles in trendy backdrops and captions like, "She said yes to forever." Forever, it seemed, had no memory. Lillian's chest tightened, not with grief, but something sharper. Older. The music changed. Kendall stood, clinked her glass, and began thanking everyone for coming. Her voice was syrupy, charming. She made jokes. Everyone laughed, until she reached the end. "And to my future mother-in-law," Kendall said with a bright, practiced smile, "thank you for joining us today. I know bridal showers aren't always fun for everyone." There were titters of polite confusion. Michael turned ghost white. Lillian tilted her head, smiled faintly, and gave a slow, unbothered clap. 1, 2, 3 beats. Kendall blinked. Lillian said nothing. But inside, she was already flipping through the mental folder she'd started months ago. Dates, details, decisions. Like when Kendall had told Beth at brunch, loud enough for Lillian to hear, "She's sweet but intense. Definitely not someone I'd trust with anything design-related." Or the time she'd canceled Lillian's venue suggestion by telling Michael she didn't want old energy near the altar. Now, as Kendall resumed her toast, oblivious to the chill she'd summoned, Lillian opened her purse just slightly and adjusted the edge of the envelope. She didn't plan to ruin the shower. She just planned to end it on her terms. The first time Lillian realized she'd been cut out, it wasn't said outright. It was written in italics on the corner of a glossy save-the-date postcard that listed Kendall, James, and family as the planning hosts. Not Michael and Kendall, not the Archers, just them. At first, she told herself not to make it a thing. Maybe it was a stylistic choice. Maybe Kendall's mother, Beth, had ordered the cards without checking. Then came the catering emails, none addressed to her. Then the venue appointment she wasn't told about until after the deposit was paid. Then the florist who smiled kindly when Lillian showed up for a consultation she hadn't been invited to, only to find out the centerpieces had already been finalized by Kendall, her mother, and a Pinterest board titled Minimalist Elegance Maximal Control. Michael didn't defend her. Not really. "They just have a vision," he said one night on the phone, his voice thin with distraction. "It's not personal. Just let them do their thing." Their thing. Lillian had once thrown that boy a birthday party with 47 cupcakes and a puppet show she learned to perform herself because the magician canceled last minute. But sure, let them do their thing. That night, she started writing things down. Not for spite, for record. The date Kendall told her, "It's okay, we've got Beth for makeup stuff. You wouldn't have to be on your feet all day." The time she called to ask about the RSVP list and was told, "We already handled the head count." The moment Kendall texted, "Hey, can we use your backyard for engagement pics? Just need to move a few things around to get the right vibe." When Lillian came home that day, her antique mirror had been dragged into the yard, her azalea bushes trampled under rented chairs. Beth had waved from the patio, sipping rosé in tennis whites. Lillian stood in her own house and felt like a guest. A ghost. A problem someone had politely worked around. She wrote it all down, one insult per page, black ink, ruled margins, and when the ache got too deep, she took the journal with her, folded into her purse, slipped into the passenger seat, and drove to the cemetery. Charles's grave sat beneath an old oak. No bench nearby, just a flat stone and a patch of stubborn grass she trimmed herself every other Saturday. He'd hated fuss, loved clarity. She sat cross-legged on the ground, journal in her lap. "They're erasing me, Charlie," she whispered, one smile at a time. The breeze rustled the leaves like a hush over the pain. "I told you I'd look after the family. I thought that meant our son. But now—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Charles had always known her silences better than her words. The next morning she met with Sadie at a quiet coffee shop 2 towns over. Her friend, her former colleague, her lawyer. Sadie ordered black coffee, no cream, no small talk. "You're not imagining this," she said after Lillian explained everything. "You're not bitter. You're being erased. Financially, socially, matriarchally. That last one's not a word. It is now." Sadie leaned forward. "Whatever you do, whatever choices you make from here on, make them tight, documented, protected, ironclad. Meaning? Meaning you don't fight fire with fire. You fight it with notarized fire extinguishers." Lillian sipped her chamomile and said nothing. But she left with a list. Names, documents, clauses, contingencies. The next entry in her journal wasn't an insult. It was a to-do list. Back at home, she placed the journal beside the framed photo of her wedding day. Her younger self smiled up from beneath a veil, one hand on Charles's chest, the other holding Michael's baby fingers. She stared at the picture until the ache gave way to something harder. Purpose, maybe. That weekend, Kendall posted a photo on Instagram, Beth holding a clipboard, surrounded by sample linens. The caption read, "Mother of the bride, killing it. Dream team only." Lillian didn't comment, but she flipped to a fresh page in the journal and began drafting something entirely different. A gift, a statement, a final correction. It would fit inside a small box, wrapped in layered tissue, and it would arrive exactly on time. It began at brunch. Not a fight, not a moment of tension, just a fork clinking against china as Kendall laughed too brightly at a joke that wasn't funny, her hand resting on Michael's wrist like a paperweight. Lillian had spent the morning ironing the tablecloth, polishing her mother's silver, and baking scones from scratch. It was the first time Kendall was meeting her in the house. Their house, the one Charles had remodeled with his own hands, the one where Michael learned to ride a bike, chipped a tooth, said "Mom" for the first time. Kendall arrived 10 minutes late and complimented the lavender napkins like someone grading an amateur's effort. "This is adorable," she said, sweeping into the dining room with her oversized sunglasses still perched atop her head. "It's like walking into a Norman Rockwell painting." Lillian smiled politely. "Thank you. We like to keep it homey." Kendall nodded. A little dated, but very sincere. That was the start. At first it felt like sandpaper, abrasive but easy to ignore, until Kendall tried to rearrange the furniture. "I just think the light hits better from this angle," she said, dragging an armchair across the hardwood without asking. "You'll thank me when you see the engagement photos." Lillian had stood in the doorway, knuckles white against the molding. "I didn't realize the photos were here." "Oh, we wanted something classic, and Michael said this house had character." Kendall grinned. "Plus, the whole old-school charm thing is trending again." That afternoon, Lillian found a porcelain lamp cracked and a bookshelf emptied for staging purposes. Her vintage linen curtains were folded on the floor like laundry. No one apologized. She didn't say anything. Not yet. It wasn't until weeks later, at a dinner with mutual friends, that she overheard Kendall's real voice. Not the sweet one, the real one. "She's a bit intense," Kendall said, twirling a piece of pasta with her fork, her voice low but not low enough. "I mean, I get it. She's alone. That must be hard. But I swear she critiques everything, like I moved one chair and she looked like I'd burned the house down." A beat. Then laughter. Beth. Michael. Even one of Lillian's longtime neighbors, chuckling awkwardly as if caught between truth and politeness. Lillian had been 2 seats away. She excused herself early that night and didn't finish her wine. After that, the invitations slowed. A dinner here, a barbecue there, forgotten group texts that always came with apologies too enthusiastic to be real. She saw the shift. So did Sadie. "They're isolating you," Sadie said bluntly one day. "She's not just managing optics. She's altering memory." "What do you mean?" "I mean, she's making you look difficult, so if you do speak up, no one believes it's out of character." And it worked. Lillian noticed the changes first in Michael. Shorter calls, longer silences. He used to drop by on Sundays for her roast chicken. Now he sent last-minute texts. "Sorry, next weekend." Things are crazy, always crazy. Even Eli, her grandson, started to pull away. She texted him after he missed their annual baking day. "Missed your favorite lemon bars." "Everything okay?" he replied 4 hours later. "Busy with finals." Kendall says I shouldn't stress. She made banana bread though. Banana bread. Her lemon bars had won blue ribbons at the county fair. But Kendall made banana bread. The following weekend, Lillian found a card tucked under her doormat. Store-bought. From a neighbor who hadn't visited in months. It read, "Thinking of you during this time of transition. Hope you find your next chapter full of light." She wasn't moving. She hadn't told anyone she was. But Kendall had. And just like that, Lillian realized the boundaries weren't blurred. They were bulldozed. She went to the hallway, took the journal from the drawer, and made a new entry. Not about what was said, but about what was lost. Trust. And just beneath that word she wrote 2 more. "Get ready, because disrespect has a lineage." And now, so did her plan. The email came at 10:17 p.m. Beth always chose strange hours to be strategic. Late enough to feel casual, early enough to catch someone unguarded. The subject line read, "Quick follow-up on wedding finances for Unity." Lillian read it twice before clicking open. Beth's tone was sugary, almost apologetic, like she was asking for a ride, not $15,000. The justification. It would mean so much to Kendall if the families showed a united front, just a shared contribution, equal partners in the celebration. Of course, your name will be listed as a contributor on the program. Not family, not mother-in-law, contributor. Still, Lillian didn't say no. Not outright. She responded the next morning, brief but direct. Happy to contribute, provided I'm looped in on the details. Planning as a family means transparency, after all. Beth replied an hour later with a cheerful, absolutely, and a digital invoice. The transaction cleared by noon. Lillian printed the receipt and slid it into a folder labeled Shared Wedding Expenses. On the cover, in her neat script, subject to review. What she didn't know at the time was that wedding expenses included a 5-day luxury bachelorette trip to Napa. No ceremony prep, no cake tasting, just matching robes, staged spa selfies, and a rented vineyard estate big enough for 6 bridesmaids and 2 professional photographers. She found out on Instagram. A reel appeared under Kendall's name, tagged #pre-Mrs. Party and #no moms allowed. One clip showed a table full of wine glasses. Another, Kendall popping a bottle with a diamond-tipped saber. And one final, unfiltered moment, Beth toasting with Kendall, saying, "This is what a real support system looks like." Lillian stared at the screen, heat building in her chest, not from jealousy, but insult. She didn't comment, she didn't text, she opened her drawer, pulled out the contract she'd had Kendall and Michael sign 6 months ago, the one everyone treated like a silly overstep. "It's just paperwork, Mom," Michael had laughed. "You're acting like we're buying a business." They hadn't read it closely, but Sadie had. The contract stated clearly, any financial contribution exceeding $10,000 is conditional on full inclusion in planning decisions. A clause buried in the second page, another in the third, outlining breach penalties, and another highlighting a retraction mechanism in case of unauthorized use. It wasn't just a contract, it was leverage, and now it was activated. The next morning, Lillian scheduled a meeting with a notary. She didn't dress up, just slacks, a navy blouse, and the leather satchel Charles gave her for their 30th anniversary. Inside, trust documents, property records, and a copy of the wedding agreement. The notary read silently. At one point he glanced up. "You're very thorough." "I had to be," Lillian replied. "People assume you're either harmless or hysterical once you hit a certain age. I prefer to be underestimated." By lunchtime it was done. She finalized a new trust structure, moving her liquid assets into a protected living trust, appointing Sadie as co-administrator. The house, previously in a shared estate with Michael, was quietly reassigned under her full control, pending title transfer. That afternoon, Beth called, her voice overly warm. "Hi, Lillian. I just wanted to touch base about the dress code for the rehearsal dinner. Since it's garden chic, I wanted to be sure you had something appropriate. I know sometimes, with age, darker tones can feel heavy." Lillian didn't respond to the insult. She responded with silence, the kind that makes people double-check their voicemail. By that evening, Lillian overheard Kendall at a family dinner whispering to someone in the hallway, "She's just old." Controlling. "My mom says it's normal at that stage. They start getting territorial." The word hung in the air. Old. Lillian wrote it down in her journal, then circled it. Not because it hurt, because it clarified. There would be no more shared illusions, no more benefit of the doubt. From here forward, every kindness would be on her terms, and every dollar she'd given, accounted for. She slid a blank note card into her purse that night, white with a gold edge. On it, she wrote, "A gift should reflect the receiver." Then she underlined receiver twice, because soon Kendall would get one, and it would be wrapped in the very tissue she mocked. The gift table was buried in blush tulle and faux pearls. Rose gold scissors sat beside stacks of presents, all wrapped in pastel paper and Tiffany blue ribbons. Lillian's box looked modest in comparison, plain cream wrapping, no bow, just a note card tucked underneath the twine. It was the last one Kendall reached for. By then, her cheeks were flushed with champagne and performance. The guests, mostly friends of Beth and Kendall's bridesmaids, had been lulled by Prosecco and polite giggles into a sugary haze. "Oh, what's this one?" Kendall asked, lifting the small box like it might break. No tag? Lillian watched from her table near the wall where a sweating glass of water sat untouched and no one had asked her to pose for pictures. Kendall peeled the tissue back slowly, one layer, then another. Inside was a white envelope. No cash, no jewelry, no heirloom, just paper. Kendall raised an eyebrow. Is this a letter? Michael, seated 2 chairs away, blinked. Mom? Lillian gave him a single nod. Kendall opened the envelope and pulled out a folded document. She smirked, like she expected it to be sentimental, a poem, perhaps, or a list of marriage advice scribbled in elegant cursive. Instead, her smile faltered, then froze. She read aloud, stumbling only once. This is to inform the occupants of the property located at 824 Maple Avenue that the residential lease agreement, signed January 14th under a contingent clause of shared familial equity, is officially terminated. The room went silent. Only the rustle of tissue paper filled the gap. Wait, Kendall said, eyes flicking across the page. What is this? Lillian stood. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. That house you moved into? It was never a gift. It was a lease, with conditions. Kendall blinked, laughable confusion giving way to something colder. Excuse me? The deposit came from me, Lillian continued, and the deed stayed in my name. You signed a lease agreement, Kendall, one with specific terms, including mutual family participation in wedding planning. You violated every clause. Murmurs rippled across the room like wind through dry grass. Michael stood now, face pale. You're serious? Lillian turned her gaze to him, not harsh, but clear. You both signed it. I asked for one thing, to be treated like a partner in the process. You excluded me, mocked me, misused funds I contributed. She took a breath. So the lease is canceled. Kendall let out a brittle laugh. You can't just, what? Evict us? From our home? It's not your home, Lillian said. It never was. Michael looked at her like he didn't recognize her. Why would you do this here? She didn't flinch. Because this is the only time you invite me. So I brought my RSVP. Gasps broke across the room like thunder rolling over a lake. Someone dropped a plastic flute. Beth's hand went to her mouth. Lillian, Kendall tried again, voice syrupy now, desperate. This isn't how families handle things. No, Lillian agreed. Families don't lie to each other or erase each other. This is how contractual tenants are handled. Kendall's hands trembled. You're joking. You can't just... Lillian walked forward slowly, retrieving the lease from her hand. I already did. She turned to the crowd, half of whom were now looking anywhere but directly at her. I'll have a moving coordinator contact you Monday, she said. You'll have 2 weeks to vacate. Keys can be left in the mailbox. She set the letter down on the cake table beside a tower of cupcakes piped with happily ever after. Then, with the poise of a woman long underestimated, she walked toward the door, her heels clicking with calm purpose. Beth sputtered, You'll regret this. Lillian didn't turn back, but as she reached for her coat, she said, loud enough for only Michael to hear, No, I regret letting it go this far. And with that, she stepped out into the spring air, cool, clear, and entirely hers. Michael caught up with her just outside the event space, the echo of her heels still fresh on the sidewalk. His voice cracked with fury, not volume, but betrayal. What the hell was that? Lillian didn't stop walking. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and adjusted her purse strap with practiced ease. I believe that was called a boundary. Michael stepped in front of her, jaw clenched. You humiliated her. She did that herself. I just delivered the paperwork. His face flushed a deep, unfamiliar shade. You blindsided us. You never said. I never got the chance, she cut in. That house? I paid the down payment. I paid the taxes, and I was repaid with silence and mockery. That lease existed because I knew one day you might forget who built your foundation. Guess I was right. Michael opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. So, you're just evicting us? No, she said coolly. I'm evicting entitlement. He faltered for a beat, then pushed back with a wounded growl. Dad would never— Don't, she said sharply. Her voice wasn't loud, but it snapped like a thunderclap. Don't pull your father into this to excuse your own cowardice. He trusted you, and you let her reshape our family like it was her Pinterest board. For a moment, neither spoke. A car passed. A baby cried in the distance. Then she took out her phone, tapped briefly, and held it up. An email. Subject line: Property showing availability, 824 Maple. I've already contacted a real estate agent, she said. Monday morning. Michael stared at the screen, stunned. I wanted to talk to you first, she said softly. But you made it clear that talk only happens on her schedule. His shoulders sagged slightly. You're overreacting. She stared at him like she was seeing a stranger. Do you even know what you've been doing to me since your father died? He looked confused. Defensive. What are you talking about? Passwords, she said. Accounts. Let me help with the bills, Mom. And then somehow I couldn't log in anymore. I got statements with unfamiliar charges. I asked for receipts. I got excuses. Michael looked down. I didn't say anything then, she continued, because I thought you were grieving. I thought it was temporary. But now I see, it was the rehearsal dinner before the main act, making me small, making me invisible, rewriting the guest list of my own life. Her words hung heavy. She didn't wait for him to reply. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, Lillian was seated in a downtown office lined with glossy mahogany. Her financial planner, Joanne, slid a stack of documents across the desk. This'll separate everything, Joanne said. Retirement, pension, life insurance, no access unless you say so. Lillian nodded. Put it under the new trust. Sadie's the co-signer. No mail forwarding, no verbal confirmations. Joanne raised an eyebrow. Going scorched earth? Lillian's smile was tired but unyielding. Number, I'm just planting new soil. She signed each page, methodically. No hesitation. That evening, she walked back into her home and turned off the hallway light with the same flick of her finger she'd done for 40 years. But this time it felt different. Cleaner, like the air had changed. Her phone buzzed. A group text from Kendall's aunt. Hey everyone! Just so you know, the earlier drama was a misunderstanding. Let's keep the vibe positive. Jachai Bride Tribe. Damage control. A second text arrived. This time from Kendall herself. Kendall, we're all a little raw today. I know things got tense. Can we talk this weekend? Just us? Lillian didn't respond. She turned off her phone, poured herself a glass of Pinot Noir, and sat at the piano bench that hadn't been touched since Charles passed. She didn't play. She just rested her fingers there lightly, as if reacquainting them with a part of herself long forgotten. Outside, the porch light clicked on. Inside, she opened her journal and wrote 4 words, no more uninvited guests. Then she underlined it once, bold, because the next guest list would only include people who knocked. It started with a whisper, like most digital storms do. By the next morning, Lillian's phone had 17 unread messages, 2 voicemails, and a screenshot from her neighbor's niece in Wisconsin. Is this your family? The video had been posted by someone's bored cousin, angled slightly off-center, poor audio, but just clear enough to catch Kendall's trembling voice as she read the lease termination aloud. Lillian's voice, measured, calm, cut through at the exact right moment. That house you moved into? It was never a gift. The caption was simple, number sign bridal shower eviction. The comments were not. Icon, who is this woman and how do I get adopted? Play stupid games, win legal consequences. Why does the villain always have better paperwork? Lillian didn't have a TikTok account. She barely used Facebook. But her landline rang 3 times that afternoon. Margaret from church, her old colleague Dennis, even the mail carrier's wife, each one some variation of, I just saw it, and I'm on your side. That part stunned her. She'd expected backlash, cruel whispers, maybe even more distance from the friends who'd stopped inviting her to group lunches. Instead, she got loyalty. Late, but real. The doorbell rang. Her younger granddaughter, Ava, 10, wide-eyed, and still in a glittery gymnastics hoodie, stood on the porch holding a sketch pad and a bag of gummy worms. "Mom says you're famous." Lillian raised an eyebrow. "I hope that's not what your teacher says too." Ava shrugged, stepping inside without waiting to be asked. "I saw the video. You looked like a boss. Was that planned?" Lillian shut the door. "Not the video." Ava dropped onto the sofa, unzipping the sketch pad. She'd drawn what looked like a caped woman holding a document like a sword. Over her head was a speech bubble. "This is not a gift. This is a clause." "You made me look cool," Lillian murmured. Ava looked up seriously. "Are you the villain?" Lillian didn't answer right away. Instead, she sat down beside her and said quietly, "I think sometimes the people who need to be stopped call the ones who stop them villains." Ava frowned, like she was chewing that over. "Did you want to be the hero?" she asked. "No," Lillian said. "I wanted to be respected." The silence that followed was heavier than it should have been for a 10-year-old, but Ava didn't fill it. She just nodded, stood, and placed the drawing on Lillian's lap. "You can keep that," she said. "I'll draw you a cape next time." That night, Lillian called Sadie. She didn't ask for advice. She just said, "It's loud out there." Sadie laughed. "Tell me about it. My paralegal forwarded me 3 blog posts and a podcast that's calling you the matriarch of mayhem." "You're trending." Lillian winced. "God." "But the story's shifted," Sadie added. "You're not the monster anymore. You're the mirror." "I never wanted a story," Lillian said. "I wanted a seat at the table." "And now you own the table. The NDA you had them sign after that check? Still enforceable. They break it, you own their wedding hashtag too." Lillian exhaled. "I'm not looking to destroy them." "Good, because the public's already doing it for you. They're combing through Kendall's old posts. Apparently she once left a 1-star review for a rescue shelter because the dog wasn't aesthetic." Lillian blinked. "What does that mean?" "No idea. But it's on Reddit now. Kendall's being memed to death." Lillian paused. "Sadie?" "Yes? If I let this die down, if I don't respond at all, what happens?" Sadie's tone softened. "Then you win twice." That night, Lillian lit a candle and sat beside Charles's photo. She didn't say much, just rested her palm against the frame. The world outside was loud, but her living room? It was still. Until her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. No voicemail, just a single text. "You think you've won. You haven't." Lillian stared at the screen. No name, no signature, but the tone? Familiar. She turned the phone over and scribbled a note in her journal. "When they lose power, they get loud. But I'm not afraid of noise anymore." Then she turned off the light and left the phone unanswered. The knock came just after 10 p.m. 3 short raps, then nothing. Lillian didn't flinch. She was still seated at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of chamomile that had gone lukewarm. The porch light cast a long, soft glow across the front entry, and for a moment, she thought about pretending not to hear it. Then came the 4th knock, harder this time. Impatient. She rose, slowly, set her cup down, and opened the door. Michael stood there, his jaw tense, eyes red-rimmed but dry. He looked smaller somehow, not in stature but in the way people do when they're carrying too many contradictions and none of them are working. He didn't wait for permission. He stepped inside. "I'm not here to fight," he said quickly, "but I need to say something." Lillian closed the door behind him and gestured toward the living room. "Then say it like a grown-up." They sat on opposite ends of the couch, a chasm of silence between them. For a moment, the ticking clock filled in everything unsaid. "You humiliated us," he began, voice tight. "No," Lillian said calmly. "I revealed the truth. What you felt was consequence." Michael leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Do you know what people are saying about us? About Kendall?" "I know what they're saying about me," she replied, "and for the first time in a long while, it's not a lie." He flinched like her honesty had weight. "I told you not to make a scene, and you made it go viral." Lillian raised an eyebrow. "Funny, I didn't film a thing." Michael's shoulders dropped, his confidence unraveling. "You could have talked to me first." "I did," she said. I tried, but every time I brought up how I was being treated, you changed the subject or said I was making it about me. You picked peace over respect." His voice cracked. "I didn't know what to do. That was your job to figure out, not mine to endure." He sat back like he'd been struck. For a while, neither said anything. Then, softly, Lillian asked, "Why did you let her talk to me that way?" Michael stared at the floor. "Because I didn't want to lose her." Lillian blinked. "So you gave me up instead?" He covered his face with both hands. When he spoke, it was muffled. "After Dad died, you just shut down. I felt like I lost both of you. And Kendall, she came in with answers, structure, a plan." Lillian's voice softened. "I wasn't shutting down, Michael. I was surviving. I lost my husband. And then, slowly, I lost my son too." He looked up, eyes glassy now. "I didn't mean to replace you. Kendall made everything seem easier." "She made you easier," Lillian corrected, "because you never had to challenge her. But I did. And I always will." The air between them felt heavier now. Michael pressed his palms against his knees, as if bracing for something. "I know you think I failed you," he said. "I don't think it," she said. "I lived it." He winced. "I didn't know how to balance everything." "You didn't try," she said. "You expected me to step back, to stay silent, but I'm not a piece of antique furniture, Michael. I don't age into invisibility." Michael's voice dropped to a whisper. "I feel like I ruined everything." Lillian stood, walked to the mantel, and picked up an old photo, Charles, holding Michael at 5 years old, both of them grinning with identical dimples. She held it out. "Fixing something broken starts with owning what you broke." He took the photo, looked at it, his fingers trembled. "I miss him," he whispered. "So do I," she said. "But missing him doesn't earn you the right to mistreat me. Grief doesn't give you a hall pass for disrespect." He looked up. "So what now?" Lillian's eyes were clear, unwavering. "Now you go home. You deal with what you built, and when you're ready to rebuild something better, not with guilt but with honesty, you knock, like everyone else." He hesitated. "Mom, you can't guilt me out of my boundaries," she said. "Not anymore." He rose, quietly, clutching the photo like a lifeline, and as he walked to the door, she added, not unkindly, "Next time, come before midnight." Then she closed the door gently behind him and turned the lock. The next morning, the house was so quiet it almost felt disapproving. Not angry, just contemplative, like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what kind of woman would step out of the bedroom today. Lillian lingered in her robe longer than usual, letting the warmth of her coffee steep in her hands before she took the first sip. Her eyes drifted to the piano in the corner, untouched, then to the mantel where the photo of Charles and Michael still stood, though now with edges worn by time and silence. Last night's conversation sat heavy in her ribs, not because she regretted it, but because truth always settled in strange places. She'd spent so many years trying to keep the peace after Charles died, trying to make things feel normal for Michael. She'd tiptoed around his grief, avoided conflict like it might crack him further, and in doing so, she'd trained herself to shrink. It hadn't started with Kendall. It had started the day she stopped being a mother with opinions and became a mother who didn't want to push him away. She set the cup down gently and stood. Across the room, the side board drawer creaked open like it had been expecting her. Inside, a thick envelope labeled Legacy Draft Only peeked out beneath the old insurance policies. She took it, set it on the table, and picked up the phone. "Hi," she said when the secretary answered. "I'd like to schedule an amendment to my estate plan." By lunchtime, she was seated across from her attorney. Not Sadie this time, but a local legal contact Sadie had recommended for long-term matters. A kind-eyed woman named Dana, who didn't blink when Lillian said she wanted to donate a third of her estate to a women's education trust. "Do you have a specific fund in mind?" Dana asked. "Not yet," Lillian replied. "Just a purpose. I'll find the right fit." Dana nodded and made a note. "And the rest of your estate?" "Still to be distributed per the trust, but I'd like language added about this portion being irrevocable. No challenges." You understand that means your son can't contest it. I understand, Lillian said. That's the point. When the paperwork was complete, Dana offered a quiet, approving smile. This is generous. Lillian shook her head. It's accurate. That evening, as she opened the front door to bring in the mail, she found something else waiting. A small bouquet of sunflowers wrapped in butcher paper, tied with pink yarn. No card, just a crayon note stuck in the folds. It read, "To Grandma, I'm on your team. Love, Ava." A beat later, Ava herself appeared from behind the hedge, arms full of baking ingredients and a grin too wide for her face. "I brought flour, and vanilla, and courage," she said. Lillian blinked. "You bake with courage?" "I do now." Inside, the kitchen came alive. They mixed, stirred, licked batter off spoons. Lillian showed her how to fold the eggs into the dough without overmixing, and Ava insisted on cracking all of them herself, shells and all. The oven clicked on, and for the first time in what felt like years, the house smelled like something joyful. When the cookies were cooling, Ava ran off to the backyard to check on her secret bug hotel, and Lillian found herself alone again, but not empty. She walked into the hallway and opened the cedar chest tucked against the wall. It had held her wedding dress for decades, along with photo albums thick with layered memories. She pulled one out, Archer Family, 1984 to 1999, and sat cross-legged on the living room rug. She flipped through pages, Charles lifting Michael on his shoulders, a cake Lillian had decorated by hand, Christmas mornings, a young Sadie at a barbecue. And then she saw it. A photo of her and Charles, dancing barefoot in their old backyard, laughing mid-spin. Her fingers paused on it. Then carefully, she removed the photo and slid it free. One keepsake. Just one. The rest? She closed the album and stood. Tomorrow, she'd begin clearing out the old wedding boxes, not to erase the past, but to stop clinging to it like an apology. She turned off the lights in the hall, her hand resting briefly on the wall as if to feel the pulse of her own change. And in the quiet dark, she whispered to no one in particular, "Let's make room for something else." The summons came on pale blue letterhead, tucked between a Bed Bath & Beyond coupon and the gas bill. Los Angeles County Superior Court, petition for protective action, elder financial coercion. At first, Lillian thought it was a mistake. Her name, typed in bold just below defendant, looked out of place, but the claim? That part was unmistakable, filed by Kendall James, alleging mental instability, manipulation, and financial coercion. She read it 3 times. Her hand didn't shake, but her breath did. By noon, she was in Sadie's office. "I should have known," Lillian said quietly, dropping the envelope on the desk. "When they lose control, they come for the story." Sadie didn't blink. She just flipped through the documents like peeling back the layers of a rotten onion. "They're accusing you of manipulating Michael into signing away property under mental duress, that you created false legal contracts during a period of cognitive decline." Lillian gave a dry laugh. "And here, I thought I was just dramatic. Now I'm delusional too." "We'll bury this," Sadie said flatly. "But it's going to court. Kendall's hired a PR-savvy legal team. They're counting on optics. You, in a cardigan. Her, in tears." "I can wear black," Lillian offered. "Villains look sharper that way." Sadie smiled faintly, then opened a fresh legal pad. "Let's prep your war paint." The courtroom was stark, wood-paneled, overly lit. Kendall sat at the front table, pale pink blouse, hair pulled into a low bun to feign humility. Her attorney, a sharp-jawed man with a Bluetooth still wedged in his ear, began with false sincerity. "This is a tragic case of generational miscommunication. Our client simply wishes to protect her family from emotional manipulation masquerading as generosity." Lillian sat still, hands folded. Then Kendall took the stand. She pulled out printed text messages, spliced screenshots, emails with subject lines taken out of context, even a video clip, grainy and clipped, Lillian standing in her yard, muttering something unintelligible. "She's confused," Kendall said sweetly to the judge. "She forgets things, mixes up dates, Once she called me by her late sister's name. I didn't want to take it this far. But we're worried. Sadie leaned in. Time to burn the curtain. When it was her turn, Sadie stood with her usual quiet force and began to unwind Kendall's story thread by thread. Every document Kendall had referenced? Altered, Sadie said, laying the originals side by side with the exhibits, receipts, metadata, timestamps, then voicemails. Lillian's calm, measured voice asking Michael for access to her bank statements. A recorded Zoom call where Kendall openly joked, "We'll just keep her out of the loop. She thinks trusts are still printed on parchment." By the time Sadie finished, the courtroom was a freezer. Kendall sat frozen. The judge, an older woman with salt-streaked hair and no patience for performance, finally leaned forward. "I'm ordering a formal cognitive evaluation for Ms. Archer, but based on what I've seen, this court finds no immediate merit to the claims. The trust stands for now." Kendall's lawyer opened his mouth, but the judge raised a hand. "We're not finished." She turned to Lillian. "Ms. Archer, you may address the court." Lillian stood, slow but steady. "I'm not confused," she began, voice strong. "I'm not vindictive. I'm not unwell. I'm a woman who has watched her role in her own family be rewritten by people who wanted my silence more than my presence." The room stilled. "I didn't raise my son to be afraid of hard conversations, and I didn't survive widowhood to be told that standing up for myself is proof of instability." She looked at Kendall. "Respect isn't a handout. It's a contract. And when you violate it, there are consequences, legal or otherwise." Lillian paused, letting it breathe. "I may be aging, but I'm not fading." As she sat down, no one spoke. Not the judge, not Kendall, not Michael, seated silently behind the plaintiff's table, staring at his hands. Outside, reporters had gathered, but Sadie ushered her out the side door, straight into the quiet of a waiting car. "You made them listen," Sadie said as they pulled away. Lillian didn't reply. She just stared ahead, eyes sharper than glass. Then her phone buzzed. No number, just one line. "You've embarrassed the wrong family. This isn't over." Lillian didn't flinch. She reached into her bag, pulled out her journal, and wrote, "Threats are just compliments with weak posture." Then she closed the book and smiled. The courthouse waiting room was colder than it should have been. Beige walls, vinyl chairs, a clock ticking in the corner like it had somewhere better to be. Lillian sat by the window, watching the clouds shift but never fully break. The kind of sky that made everything below it feel undecided. Her hands were steady, but her mind spun. What if Kendall wins? What if all the signatures, all the clauses, all the receipts, what if none of it matters? What if she's painted as bitter instead of brave, difficult instead of deliberate? Women had been called worse for far less. She crossed her ankles and uncrossed them again. A cough from across the room broke her spiral. A young man in a navy suit glanced up from his phone, then looked away. No recognition. Just another stranger waiting for justice to show up late. She closed her eyes and remembered a different room. Warmer. Laughter rising like steam. Her wedding day. Charles had grinned like he couldn't believe his luck. His tie was crooked. On purpose, he later admitted, so she'd fix it and touch his chest first. Her bouquet had come undone right before the ceremony. She'd laughed, tucked the flowers back in with a bobby pin and said, "It's still a beginning, even when it's messy." God, she missed that girl, the version of herself who believed in beginnings without paperwork, in family without asterisks. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" The voice was familiar, smoky, quick, and unapologetic. "Still dressing like a librarian during a power outage?" said the caller. Lillian smiled before she could stop herself. Mara. Mara Jameson, her college roommate, political science major turned therapist, whose graduation speech had gotten her nearly banned from campus. "I saw the court transcript online," Mara said. "Then I saw the Reddit thread. And then I saw your face on a meme holding a lease agreement like a sword. Thought I'd check in before they start selling action figures." "I didn't ask for this attention," Lillian said. "You didn't ask to be erased either." Lillian's throat tightened. "I didn't want a war." number, but you didn't surrender either. That matters. They talked for 20 minutes about grief, guilt, power, and daughters-in-law who think Pinterest is a personality, and when they hung up, Lillian felt less like a defendant and more like herself, the version with steel under her seams. Her phone buzzed again, this time an email. Subject, request for interview, Lillian Archer. It was from an independent journalist, Emily Tran. Smart, neutral, thorough. Lillian had seen her name in bylines before. The message was short and respectful. We're preparing a balanced feature on the generational power dynamics playing out in modern families. If you're open to sharing your experience, we'd love to hear your side. In your words, and on your terms. Lillian stared at the screen. Her side. Her words. Not tabloids, not whispers, not Kendall's curated PR blitz. She tapped out a reply. I'll speak, but I choose the setting. No clickbait, no ambush. You want my truth? You meet me where I live it. Then she hit send. Across the room, Sadie stepped in from the hallway holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Lillian and sat beside her. Still want to go through with it? Sadie asked. Lillian didn't hesitate. More than ever. Sadie nodded, then opened a folder in her lap. The forensic tech recovered metadata showing Kendall edited the text screenshots. We've got date stamps, IP logs, even a cache backup that shows she removed entire threads. Lillian sipped her coffee. She brought Photoshop to a paper fight. Sadie smiled. They'll call you cold for how thorough you've been. They've called me worse, Lillian replied, and I survived all of it. The clock ticked louder now, 30 minutes until the next hearing. Outside the courthouse window, the clouds finally cracked open and a shaft of sun hit the far edge of the parking lot like a quiet vote of confidence. Just then, Lillian's phone buzzed again. Unknown number. If you speak to the press, we bury you. That's a promise. She showed Sadie the message. Sadie's jaw tightened. That's the second threat this week. Lillian didn't flinch. She deleted the message, then turned to Sadie, her voice calm. Make sure Emily brings a recorder. Because the story wasn't over, it was just now being told. The eviction notice posted on the front door of 824 Maple Avenue looked almost clinical. City seal at the top, dry language in 11-point font, and an unmistakable date printed in bold red ink. The neighbors didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. Everyone had already watched the slow unraveling from lawn chairs, Facebook posts, and discreet peeks through kitchen blinds. When the moving truck pulled up and Kendall refused to make eye contact with anyone, even Beth stayed silent. Inside, the house looked smaller than Lillian remembered it, hollowed out by too many years of passive disrespect. She didn't go back in. She stood on the sidewalk as the final box was loaded, her attorney beside her, clipboard in hand. Michael stood on the front steps, his hands in the pockets of a hoodie she once bought him for a college camping trip. His face was drawn, not cruel, not angry, just late. I know I screwed it up, he said, not quite looking at her. Lillian nodded. You did. He took a breath. But I want to fix it. I want to come back. You'll have to come back as someone new, she said. Not Kendall's translator, not your father's shadow, just you. And if I can't? She met his eyes evenly. Then you don't. No dramatics, no door slam. Just a clear goodbye to the version of him that betrayed her. 2 days later, the court ruled in her favor. Kendall's false elder coercion claim didn't just collapse, it crumbled under the weight of metadata, cross-examination, and the voicemail where she drunkenly laughed about the fake emails. The judge fined her for perjury, sealed the record in Lillian's favor, and issued a quiet warning in chambers about abusing legal systems for personal vendettas. Sadie called it a clean win. But Lillian didn't celebrate. She just called the real estate agent. 2 months later, the house sold above asking. She signed the final papers on a Thursday afternoon, tucked the check into a new fireproof safe, and didn't look back. Instead, she drove north. The cottage sat by a sleepy lake in a town where the mail came late, and no one asked about trending hashtags. It had a screened-in porch, a fireplace that crackled even when the heat worked fine, and enough garden space for herbs, tomatoes, and maybe a fig tree, if she felt ambitious. The first time she stood barefoot on the back deck with her coffee and no inbox to check, she thought, this is what beginning again should feel like. Not explosive, just whole. A week later, she hosted a bridal shower. Not for herself, not for family, for Rachel, a soft-spoken single mother from her old church group who was remarrying quietly after surviving years of something unkind. The guest list was small, tight, safe. The decorations weren't extravagant, just paper lanterns, fresh daisies, and a bundt cake that Lillian baked herself with Ava's help. She used her mother's old vanilla glaze recipe. Ava insisted on adding edible glitter. There were no passive-aggressive toasts, no curated cruelty, just laughter, kindness. Two women hugging after the bride unwrapped a handmade apron and cried harder than anyone expected. Near the end, Lillian pulled a small box from a cabinet, wrapped in floral tissue. No card. Rachel unwrapped it slowly. Inside, Lillian's porcelain teacup set, 6 pieces, each hand-painted, each rimmed with silver. The same ones that had once been displayed untouched for years, deemed too fragile for guests. Rachel gasped. "These are beautiful. They're meant to be used," Lillian said. "Even the delicate things." A hush settled over the room. Not sadness, reverence. Later, as the guests trickled out, Rachel hugged her tightly and whispered, "You made this feel like a home." Lillian smiled. "Then I finally did it right." That night, as the fire dimmed and the lake stilled under moonlight, Lillian opened her journal one last time. She didn't write a list or a warning. She wrote a recipe, vanilla bundt plus Ava's glitter. Then she added one final note beneath it. "This legacy will never taste like silence again." And she closed the book, not to hide it, but to let it rest. The knock this time was softer, hesitant. Lillian wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened the door to find Michael standing beneath the porch light, hands in the pockets of a windbreaker he hadn't zipped properly. He looked like someone who hadn't slept, hadn't shaved, hadn't figured out what to do with his mouth since the last time he spoke too late. "I'm not here to argue," he said. His voice had lost its edges. She stepped aside, letting him into the cottage's modest living room. No fire this time, no warm cake smells, just the quiet crack of her knuckles as she folded her arms. He sat on the edge of the couch, eyes hollow. "She's filing." Lillian didn't ask who. "Kendall wants a clean split. Apparently I've become brand poison." Her words. He let out a dry laugh, but it didn't go anywhere. "I'm sorry," Lillian said. She meant it, but she didn't offer more. Michael rubbed his hands together like he was trying to start a fire with just friction. "I don't have anywhere to go right now. The apartment we looked at fell through. My stuff's in storage. I just need a place to land. For a little while." He looked at her then. For real. Not like a son trying to negotiate, but like a man who had run out of shortcuts. Lillian didn't blink. "No." Michael's face collapsed a little. "Not even for a week?" She walked to the kitchen table, opened a drawer, and pulled out a slim folder. She placed it in his lap. "Therapy referrals, sliding scale. One of them specializes in family systems and identity roles." He stared at it like it was written in another language. "I'm not cutting you off," she said. "I'm drawing a boundary. There's a difference." His voice caught. "I feel like a failure." She softened, but didn't yield. "Then feel it. That's how we change." He sank back against the cushion. "You're really not going to let me stay?" She walked to the bookshelf and pulled something from the second shelf. A worn blue spiral notebook. The edges frayed, a cartoon shark sticker still clinging to the corner. "I found this when I was packing," she said. "You wrote in it after 3rd grade, do you remember?" He took it, confused, flipped the cover open. On the first page, in giant block letters, it read, "Things I Will Build." Below it, a list in pencil. A treehouse, a robot friend, a rocket, a better world. He touched the corner of the page, eyes stinging. "I forgot this even existed." Lillian sat across from him. "You knew what mattered once. Before the noise, before the pride. You knew how to dream like a builder, not a bystander." He closed the book carefully. "I don't deserve your kindness." She tilted her head. That's not for you to decide. For a long time, the only sound was the lake wind tapping softly against the window panes. Finally, Michael stood. His shoulders slumped, but his spine a little straighter. Okay, he said. I'll call one of the therapists. Call two, she replied. Get a second opinion. He laughed once, short and real. At the door, he paused, clutching the notebook to his chest. I never meant for things to go this far. I know, she said, but meaning well doesn't repair anything. He opened the door, hesitated, then turned back. Can I write to you? Her voice was steady. You can, but I may not respond until the handwriting changes. That landed. He nodded and stepped out into the cool evening. She watched him walk to the car. No dramatic music, no montage of flashbacks, just a man, holding a notebook, heading toward accountability. She shut the door and leaned her back against it, exhaling the kind of breath that only comes from standing still after too many storms. Then she whispered aloud, "Let them learn to knock." And for the first time in years, she didn't reach for her journal. She let the silence stand. The envelope was thick, not heavy but deliberate. Lillian signed the last page of the revised will without fanfare, her signature smooth and unwavering. Dana, the estate attorney, slid it back into its folder and gave her a subtle, knowing nod. It's final now, Dana said. Are you sure you want to make it irrevocable? I've never been more certain of anything, Lillian replied. She stood and gathered her coat. No ceremony, no drama, just a quiet moment closing a louder chapter. The new will did away with all assumptions. Michael and Kendall's names were gone, not as punishment, but as consequence. In their place, a newly named fund, seated with the majority of her assets, the Charles Archer Grant for women reclaiming their lives, targeted at single mothers, late-life divorcees, and women aging out of silence. You always said we should build things, she had whispered once to Charles's photo. This one's for the ones no one built for. By the time she reached home, her inbox had already begun to buzz. The feature Emily Tran wrote went live that morning. It wasn't clickbait. It was surgical, kind, real. It wove her story with threads of American caregiving dynamics, financial coercion, and aging with agency. It included direct quotes from Lillian, calm, unflinching, and filled with clarity. It went viral within 6 hours. A TikTok creator stitched clips of Lillian's court statements with scenes from legal dramas and the caption, "When the matriarch becomes the legacy." A college student tweeted, "My grandma read this article and finally called her lawyer. Thank you, Lillian." Lillian didn't comment. She didn't need to. But the email from the university president landed in her inbox by late afternoon. Subject, invitation to speak at Emerson College Women's Leadership Forum. Lillian read it twice before blinking back tears. She didn't respond right away. She walked to her closet instead and opened a small jewelry box tucked in the corner. Inside was a single item, a lapel pin, bronze with a slight patina shaped like an oak tree. It had belonged to Charles, given to him the day he was promoted to lead architect at his firm. He wore it to every groundbreaking, every ribbon cutting, every major moment that said, "This matters." She pinned it to her blazer's collar. Then she replied, "I'll be there. On one condition, I speak last." 2 weeks later, she stood backstage at the Emerson auditorium. The crowd was larger than she'd expected. College students, faculty, women in their 40s, 60s, 80s, a few men with notebooks, a local state representative in the back row. Even Ava sat front and center, legs crossed, wearing her matriarch mode hoodie from Etsy. When her name was announced, the applause began even before she reached the mic. She didn't read a speech. She didn't need to. She looked out across the room and said, "My name is Lillian Archer. I'm 71 years old. I was once a wife, a teacher, a mother, and for a long time a quiet participant in my own dismissal." The room went silent. I stayed silent because I thought dignity came from endurance. That being quiet was the price of being respected. But I was wrong. Dignity isn't silence. Dignity is clarity. She took a deep breath. People told me I was brave, but this isn't bravery. It's remembering. Remembering I was always worth listening to. I just needed to raise my voice where it could echo. When she finished, the auditorium rose as one. A full standing ovation. Lillian didn't cry. She didn't bow. She simply stepped back from the mic, the weight of Charles's pin grounding her, and let the sound of that applause carry the final truth. She hadn't just reclaimed her life. She'd redrafted its meaning. Afterward, as she returned to her seat, a young woman pressed a small card into her hand. No words, just a handwritten message. "You made me call my mother. Thank you." And for the first time, Lillian felt the weight of her legacy, not as burden but as inheritance, the kind you choose to give. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, no return address, just her name, written in Michael's unmistakable handwriting, slanted slightly to the right, as if still trying to outrun consequence. Lillian stood at the kitchen counter, thumb running along the edge of the flap. For a moment she debated tossing it unopened, but she knew herself too well for that. She slid a paring knife beneath the seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. It was only 5 words. "I understand now. Thank you." No signature, no plea, no questions. Just that. She read it once, then again, and then she folded the page in half and walked to the hallway desk. She opened the top drawer, beside the ink pens, under the old library receipts, and tucked it inside. She didn't cry. She didn't reply. Some things aren't meant to be reopened. Some are meant to be witnessed, placed gently in a drawer, and left there to rest. Outside, the lake was smooth as glass. Spring had leaned fully into itself, trees greening, birds returning, the garden beds beginning to swell with tiny basil shoots and hopeful tomato vines. Inside, the cottage was alive with small domestic noises. The dishwasher humming, wind tickling the window panes, Ava in the next room trying to teach the cat how to sit. Lillian moved to the living room and sat by the open window. Sunlight poured across the hardwood, dappling the rug where the notebook from her own college days still sat from the night before. She hadn't touched it in years, but last night she'd written something down. Just a single sentence. Some gifts don't fit in boxes. She exhaled and closed her eyes. And for a moment, she was back at that bridal shower. But this time, in her mind, she wasn't seated by the wall. She wasn't holding a sweating glass of water, excluded and ignored. She was laughing, unapologetically, loudly, a real belly-deep laugh that tilted her head back and showed every line on her face. She imagined herself reaching for a cupcake without being watched, pouring her own champagne, refusing to shrink. She imagined Kendall's voice couldn't touch her. Beth's smiles couldn't manipulate her. Michael's silence couldn't cage her. Because in this version, the room had already been reclaimed, not with revenge, with presence. The fantasy faded gently, like steam off a kettle, but the warmth lingered. That Saturday, she stood beneath a rented archway strewn with eucalyptus and baby's breath, holding a flute of sparkling cider. Rachel, radiant in a simple tea-length gown and the courage it took to believe in second beginnings, was saying her vows. Ava clutched a basket of rose petals like it was treasure. And Lillian? She stood beside the dessert table, her hands resting lightly on its edge. When the officiant pronounced them married, a cheer rose across the crowd, small but mighty. Lillian raised her glass, and when Rachel found her eyes in the crowd, Lillian smiled and said, "Just loud enough. Some gifts open you up instead." Later that night, she walked the garden path behind the cottage. The moon was high, silver bright and dignified. She paused by the rosemary bush Ava had planted and looked back at the lit windows of her new home. Soft shapes moving within, voices raised in joy, music drifting faintly from a speaker. She thought of all the things she'd let go of this year, and all the ones she'd finally let in. Lillian pulled her journal from her coat pocket. Just one entry left to write. She opened to a fresh page, pressed pen to paper, and with steady, certain script, she wrote, "I didn't ruin the bridal shower. I just gave it the closure it needed." Then she capped the pen and walked back toward the light.